the evidence points to the fact that those who join terrorist organizations will invariably try to conceal any ostensible sign of religious devotion precisely so they are not detected. So if we're going to look to profiling, I think that ethnic profiling and profiling for overt signs of religiosity will actually miss the target, as it has done so in this instance, if the evidence indicates this was indeed a jihadist attack. I think what we need to start looking at is psychological factors. We need to start looking at ideas that are adopted and behavior. Now, those sorts of ideas we are familiar with. You know, anyone who starts saying things such as, it's a duty, it's incumbent upon Muslims to resurrect this so-called theocratic caliphate, or somehow there's a global war going on against Islam and Muslims, or somehow democracy is antithesis to Islam. These are the sorts of ideas that radicals begin to adopt. And if they begin speaking in this way, I'd say to you, Megan, even if they're drinking alcohol and eating pork, but they're speaking in this way, they are surer signs for radicalization than overt signs of religiosity, which will be concealed by a terrorist.
All right, welcome back to the show. So that was Maajid Nawaz appearing on the Kelly file, and he is a former Islamic extremist, so you'd think that he would know whereof he speaks. However, he's saying that they would try to conceal religious devotion, and yet in this specific instance, this guy went to the mosque, went to work, went back to the mosque, spent a good deal of his time at the mosque, which is how I conceive of religious devotion, and right? So when faced with this example, he's telling us that not to believe our lying eyes? Okay, I'm joined now by Diana West. She's the author of American Betrayal. And let's get your take on this.
Well, that to me, and hello to you, Sam.
Yes.
That to me is a classic instance of double talk meant to confuse and thoroughly tie in knots any listener looking for clarity and wisdom. In other words, talk of the caliphate or the war against Islam are very much part and parcel of religiosity within Islam. Islam is a religion that sanctifies jihad, and these are simply expressions of the political and outward manifestations of this religiosity. You cannot separate jihad from the religion of Islam. And someone who is coming on a show like this alleged ex-radical is simply giving people more smoke in their eyes, where they're trying to make some kind of impossible distinction between discussions of the caliphate, which is essentially a religious state that is based on Islam, from the trappings of devotion. It is devotion. Jihad is devotion. The caliphate is the worldly expression of that devotion. It's absolute nonsense. There's so many clearer markers. People don't need to go to ex-radicals for understanding what Islam or Islamic jihad is. And in this particular case, we had people living next door watching an attack, people mobilizing for an attack, and their survival instinct, their own lying eyes, they purposefully self-censored their own survival instincts, their own understanding, their own smell test. Something was wrong due to the conditioning of people like this Maajid Nawaz and our own culture of political correctness, as we call it, which is another way of just absolutely sundering facts from judgment, reality from implication, all of these things that have made us defenseless against these kinds of assaults.
That's right. So, and I've covered this book, but I think it's time maybe I reprise this coverage of a book by Gavin de Becker called The Gift of Fear. And in it he says, we have these instincts inside of us, and we are conditioned to just to pat them down and say, "Oh no, don't overreact. Stop being so fearful," or, don't be a wuss, or don't profile.
Don't profile.
Which is of course absurd. And in fact, Diana, I said this earlier, I believe that part of the reluctance to call it terrorism is because in a way that's profiling, because terrorism somehow, intrinsically, at least to the left, means Islam, and they don't want to call it Islam.
Right.
And so they're afraid to use the word terror, which is absurd, because when you have 3 people in tactical vests come in and shoot up your Christmas party, That's terror. I think everybody in their right mind would say right off the bat, that's terrorism.
Yes, and terrorism is already a euphemism, as you're alluding to
jihad
as a part of Islam. Yes, absolutely, and we can take this back right to the beginning of this terrible age we live in. September 11th, 2001, you had an airline clerk in Boston tamp down those fears, tamp down her understanding that when she was looking at Muhammad Atta and his accomplice entering that plane runway, going onto that plane, she knew there was something wrong with them by their outward nervousness, by their lack of luggage, by their appearance, by their Middle Eastern appearance, I should say, by everything about them, by the way they were dressed, by the way they were not making eye contact, any number of outward signs that were telling her something was wrong with these two guys. And she said after the attacks that she had repressed this natural reflex that something is wrong, that something needs to be questioned due to all of these kinds of conditioning that we are subject to, that again, the book you described sounds exactly right. I've discussed it in different kinds of metaphors myself. This is taking away who we are and how we will survive, and this is why it is so dangerous. It is so terribly dangerous, and we see it over and over again, whether it's last week or a few days ago out in San Bernardino with the neighbors who had been watching, or the ticket taker up in Boston on 9/11. This is where we are, and this is why this keeps happening to us, and this is why you have newscasters afraid to discuss this. It is simply just facts. It is simply just a body of knowledge. It is simply just understanding, and they're always looking for the apologetic escape hatch, where they don't actually have to confront reality and deal with it. And this, to me, of course, one metaphor, the death of the grown-up, American betrayal is another, but this is where we are and why it is so dangerous.
That's right.
Across the spectrum, it is across everybody in public life seems to be subject to this. In fact, it seems to be a way to get into public life is to have this lack of understanding, this lack of courage, to actually just have frank discussions, just discuss things, just look at things with any kind of neutrality and understanding and desire to seek the truth, and that's where we are not.
Well, I will say, I get the feeling that the American public in general is kind of fed up with this, with these words that are steeped in this political correctness, and I'm not sure that they'll express that outrage in anything but an election, but I kind of wish they would. I mean, I gotta say, watching this guy talking on Kelly last night, and I was just like, what? Yeah. Don't look for outward signs of religiosity? What?
Insane.
That's the opposite. We're in opposite world now. It's, my kids would love that because it's opposite day. Say exactly what you don't mean and mean exactly what you don't say, but it left me kind of outraged because Kelly sat there like a bobblehead.
Right.
Oh yeah, okay. So if they're eating pork, maybe we should go. So what is he advocating? That we go after Muslims who eat pork? Like, it's absurd.
It is absurd. It is absurd. And again, to me, it is a clear sign that this is not someone to be trusted as a guide to this terrible problem, to this problem of our age, this tragedy of our age. This is not someone to go for guidance. This is not, to my view, is not someone I would put on my show as, oh yes, tell us the way things will be. There are many experts, there are many people who've been studying this for so long, who have so much more understanding and clarity, and, give it to, at this point, we are all capable of making these kinds of deliberations. We have all access to the books. We have all access to the events of our time. I mean, people do not need authorities like this, who I believe are engaging in double talk and deception, to try to understand what's going on. We can all turn on the TV. We don't. The IQ involved here is minimal. Requires
it's true.
What is happening? Our world is being destroyed, and Islam is the vector. I mean, how hard is that?
The only interesting thing about what this guy said was that if you really take him at his word, he's impugning all Muslims. The extraordinarily devout Muslims and the ones who hide their devoutness, and then the ones who are ostensibly not Muslim at all.
Well, so, I think, if he is engaging in deception, what he's basically doing is telling people that there is nothing wrong with devout Muslims that there's nothing wrong with Islam, that there are people who have this sort of political freak out, and that's the problem to look for, as opposed to mass Islamic immigration, mosques in your neighborhood, et cetera, whereas I would look at, for example, several years ago, a very excellent study came out of the American Mosque, a look at 100 American mosques with very rigid academic standards imposed on the research, and found that 80% of American mosques were actually featuring violent materials. So here we go again. This is not something that is exceptional. It is not something that is marginal. It is something that is mainstream. And the reason it's mainstream, again, so simple. Jihad is central to Islam.
Right.
Easy.
Diana West, thank you so much for coming on. We've run out of time.